To oba filmy reklamowe Krakowa, które wyświetliliśmy i teraz już oddaję głos Państwu. Także czekamy na rozpoczęcie konferencji.
Hello, Daria from IFLA.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation to participate on this conference with you today. I will have to excuse myself because my speech is at noon today. I will be with you all the time, but probably I will have my camera turned off except when I give you my speech, because I have a little helper today with me. So we will be without camera if it's not a problem.
Of course, I understand it.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome at the 29th conference concerning the resilience of landscape. I would like to extend the words of welcome to the authorities of the university, our special guests, the speakers, and the audience. I also welcome Vice Dean Faculty of Architecture, Professor Przybylak, Vice President of the European Route of History Gardens, Łukasz Przybylak, and I also welcome Dean of Faculty of Civil Engineering, Architecture and Environmental Engineering, Anna Bazan-Krzywoszańska. As you all know, the recent months have shown how difficult are the challenges which we face. When we met a year ago, we were debating with some hope, asking each other questions what the post-pandemic life will be like. So for 8 months now, we have been witnessing an immense humanitarian crisis caused by the destructive aggression against the independent country. Economic, energetic, and ecological problems appear now much more frightening. The question remains how to prevent such crisis, what we can change ourselves, and how to build resilience. What actions should be taken in relation to the historic green heritage? How to tackle these challenges, guided by the social, health, national, and economic benefits in the longer perspective. The conference, which I'm currently organizing, have been discussing the crucial subject of protection and survival for 29 years. During the conference, we are going to listen to 34 presentations delivered by the representative of 28 institutions from 10 countries. The aim of the conference will be discuss the phenomenon of resilient cultural landscape and its components to external pressures. Before we move to the conference proceeding, just a few housekeeping remarks. Please observe the time limits. Special guests 20 minutes, speakers 10 minutes. Unfortunately, the presentation which exceed the time limits will be interrupted. You may ask questions. Please use the chat during the presentation. After the presentation, if the time permits, the speakers will answer the questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, the proceeding of the 29th conference is open, and now I give the floor over the Vice President of European Route of Historic Gardens, Łukasz Przybylak. Please, the floor is yours.
Cracow. Thank you, Katarzyna, for your very kind invitation and introduction. We are meeting once again, unfortunately online, but still the topic which we are going to have today is quite an important one. So far, we are approaching a very difficult times in terms of the climate change and climate crisis, and a lot of other crises as well, as we are struggling a very big conflict in the eastern of Europe. But not to make our start any longer, I would like welcome our very special guest from the very grand Palace of S.R.O in Netherlands. Willem Klaas Zieleman will tell us something about the necessity of maintenance of the history garden. So welcome, and Willem, the floor is yours now.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and well, as soon as the pictures are shown, I can start my presentation. Can you? Yes, they are coming. Yeah. Good morning, all of you. I'm telling something about the necessity of maintenance of historic gardens, of all gardens actually. And I started with a quote from Voltaire, saying that the society, the garden is also an imagery of society, and we can't take an ideal situation for granted. It always needs maintenance and care. The next picture, please. I'm working at S.R.O for almost 40 years, and S.R.O has two phases, more or less. There is this vast landscape park, 650 hectares, shown on the left, and the pristine and very labor-intensive Baroque garden, shown on the right. They both need maintenance, but both of a very different kind, and I like to explain a little bit more during this presentation. Next one, please. It's very important to know where you are and be aware of the nature of the place. Here on the above is shown the 1806 map of a part of the park, and beneath is a lidar print, where you can see much of the historic structure still in situ. The next one, please. Where did it start? S.R.O in the 1970s, still a royal residence, but awaiting a very big restoration of both the palace and the gardens. Here you see the palace that came through the ages, enlarged, plastered, and amidst a very large landscape park with the Baroque garden still hidden under the lawns. Next one, please. And then the 1980s reconstructed garden, just finished in 1984, with a big show. Next one, please. Well, the results of the second renovation. After 25 years, we had to completely to reconstruct the entire garden. New maps were available. The map on the left was just discovered in a German archive in 2003, And it means it delivered us a lot of new interpretations. For instance, the upper garden on the right, and it was a grass garden again. All the patterns you see are made of grass, as it was in the 17th century. It means a lot of work, 2.5 kilometers of steel edging, and a lot of very little lawns that have to be mown twice a week. Next one, please. Yes, and well, good maintenance is one thing, but you can't always avoid disasters. In 2008, with a new planting in the garden was struck by the box blight disease. And with 27 kilometers, this was a big disaster. First, we started to use chemicals to fight the disease. This worked, but it's not sustainable, and you don't want to spray your garden every 10 days. So we had to look for alternatives. We came in Bad Zwischenahn in Germany at the Institute for Horticulture, and they helped us finding replacements. And we came with the Ilex crenata, the so-called Japanese holly. It's possible to use it in the Netherlands, as the climate is a bit less cold than in Eastern Europe, and it still works in a part of the garden until now. I will tell a bit more about it later. Now we can change back to box again, as there is developed a new type of box made out of Asian types of box, and they are resistant to both the box blight and the caterpillar that is also attacking the box, and we are very happy with it. And we started in a small part of the garden, the King's Garden, but over the years we will use this new types of box in other parts of the gardens as well. The next one. Well, not only the box caused some problems after 25 years, but also the other equipment in the garden. The edging in the 1980s was made out of a kind of a plastic, and it was deteriorating. And you can see not only the diseases were causing problems with the box, but also the age of the box. Those plastic edgings were replaced by steel edgings, and you can see them on the right, very sustainable, and they are lasting very, very well until now. Next one, please. Well, you have a lot of historic materials. Lau is happy with many maps, drawings, and so on. But an old map is something that you have to translate it into a working drawing. And you can see the old one from the early 18th century on the left, and the new one made out of this old drawing on the right. And this was the plan that was used for the reconstruction, including the gravel in the different colors. The next one, please. Well, on your left side, you see the Queen's Garden with the 1980s reconstruction, and all the box hedges has become quite thick. And it was an interpretation from the 1980s, and we discovered that a box is not only a hedge, but it's also it is meant to be edging and not hedging. And you see the difference on the left and on the right. On the left, you can see that box is really a big topic in the garden. On the right side, it's only used as an elegant lining to have the different kinds of gravel to keep them out of another. The next one, please. Well, we had to start with completely replanting and reconstruction of the garden in 2007, and this cost a reconstruction over 4 years. And here you can see the results with much finer patterns in the entire garden. The upper garden completely as a grass garden with grass patterns, and only one tree from the landscape garden has left. It is a tulip tree over 240 years old, and it's a monument on itself, and it's still in a very good condition. And you can also see the palace with its brick walls, and the other parterres in the lower garden, and in the distance the King's Garden. It's embedded in the landscape park that is still there. And the fine thing about Hedlo is that people can start in the formal garden and then continue their visit in the landscape park, which is enormous. The next one, please. Well, during the second reconstruction, you can see the difference very well in the lower garden. The 1980s reconstruction on the right, with quite a massive amount of red gravel in the garden, and on the left side, the more refined pattern with all the types of gravel, spread out over the entire parterre, as it was shown in the old prints. The next one, please. Well, here you can see this pattern. We have reused a lot of material. We want to be sustainable as well. All the red gravel can't be found anymore. It came from a quarry in Belgium, and we had to be careful to clean it and to use it again. The box hedges have grown a little bit more in the meanwhile. The next one, please. Well, maintenance is something in a formal garden and an historic garden as well. And we had to develop a lot of machinery by ourselves. On your left side, you see one of the gardeners clipping the young hedges, and it's the hedge scissor, the electric one, is put on a kind of gear which help the gardeners to save their backbones, and it's working very easy because the cotton steel is used as a rail to have the machine to let the machine run over the hedges. So also with the big slopes that are surrounding the gardens, once they were intended as walking slopes to admire the garden from above. And nowadays, and they're also protecting the garden a little bit from winds. Nowadays, we can't mow them again with scythes as I did in the 17th century, or with other dangerous equipment. But we developed a machine, and with a hydraulic arm on a tractor, and that rides alongside the slope, and that makes working very easy. They have to be clipped in the season twice a week. Right above, you see the result of a clipped hedge. It has to be hoovered, of course, after clipping, and the machine is entirely developed by the gardeners themselves. And you do not only need good gardeners, but some technical skills are very welcome in this type of gardens. And over the years, this has worked very, very well. The next one, please. Well, so in a formal garden, you still need a lot of hands, and we are very happy with the 35 volunteers, and they're coming every Monday morning when the gardens are closed for the public, and they help us picking the weeds in the garden. And well, the oldest lady on the left, she's almost 90, and she refuses to retire, and she still comes every week. And I think it's not only a great help for us, but there's also a social aspect about volunteers. People are looking forward to meet each other, to have a chat, to drink coffee together, and to work. And that's also an important element in working with volunteers. On the right side, you see the garden staff that's always present at Hedlo, 16 gardeners. And well, of course, we also have to pick weeds, and it's a little bit boring job. So you don't want to have people working the entire week on weeding the garden. So we are doing it all together with all the 16 gardeners. There is also a social aspect on it, and it's only for 2 or 3 hours a week. And afterwards, everybody is happy. We have talked to each other. And you can leave the weeding for the rest of the weeks. Yes, next slide. Another element on historic gardens is maintenance on the long term. I mean, for instance, the replacement of alleys. We had to start replacing our our historic alleys in front of the palace. I had to select more than 500 beech trees. And the good thing is they were all grown from seeds that were collected from the old trees. So we could replant the alleys with our material that's originating from Hedlow. We had to replace them more quickly than we thought, and this has to do with, I think, also with climate change and with long periods of drought. And especially the old beech trees were declining very quickly. And well, then we have to do something as they became dangerous. The next one, please. Well, we're going into the park, and here you can see this LiDAR picture on the right showing this starwood. And it originates from the 17th century. I think they had a more formal approach than they have now, but it's still there. And you can see the lines in the park. They are over 300 years old. The planting has softened and it has changed over the years. But well, all these old historic elements are still there, and it's good to be aware of them and to recognize them and to explain them to visitors and also to our own gardeners. Next one, please. So another part in this big park. On the left side, you see a drawing of an elegant romantic setting with a gazebo, Italian poplars, spruces, and so on, and little bridges. Well, over the print is 200 years old, and on your right you see the gazebo is still there. It had to be replaced every 25-30 years, as it is made of natural materials, and they don't last very long. But well, the tradition of rebuilding this gazebo is still practiced. You also see the little bridges that are shown on the print, but the other plantings they have grown, and they are not the same anymore. And well, the park direction choose to not to reconstruct the entire area, but only parts of it. Next one, please. The big lakes, they're very close to the formal garden, and they are there's somewhat more maintenance on it. On your left, you see also a 200-year-old drawing, and on your right, the present situation. And it doesn't differ so much. This part of the park was restored, cleaned up a little bit with all kinds of trees about 25 years ago, and it's in a very fine condition nowadays. Next one, please. A very labor-intensive part of this lake planting is fuchsia planting. It's an early of a late 19th century addition to the gardens, and much loved by the public. And well, you can imagine they have to be watered, regularly. We can do this automatically now, and they have to be cleaned, brought out in the spring and brought in this time of the year. So this means a little bit more work, but it's worth the compliments of the visitors, and it's an important part of the park at Hedlow. The next one, please. Well, climate change is one of the things to be aware of nowadays. And well, the serious thing is this is a little canal in the park, dug in the 17th century to feed the fountains in the formal gardens. And well, the slopes are about 4 meters high, and you can't water them, and they became very dry during the last summers. And so some of the slopes are crumbling, and they are losing their shape. And I think that's a big danger. And you have to find out how you can restore them or to tackle this problem. And I'm afraid you can't tackle it completely. There's not much work to be done on this part of the garden, but there is a peak in fall and in the autumn, when all the leaves are falling in the water, and you want the water to be clean and to have the water run. So all the leaves and this miles of little canals had to be removed in a short time. So there is a very big peak in the work there. The next one, please. Well, for a very fine picture of both seasons, the end of the autumn and springtime in the so-called Wilhelmina Valley in the park. It's a valley. It's dating from the ice ages, and with a height difference of 20 meters, which is really something in the flat Netherlands. And well, there is not much work to be done here for the responsible gardeners. The only thing you have to do is to remove the young birch trees and the young pine trees. Otherwise, the entire park will be grown into woodland within 20 years. So there's not much. It's not much work, but it's essential, and that you do this work, do this kind of work. The next one, please. Another element in the park are some very old fortresses. They were not meant as real fortresses, but to train the soldiers in the palace surroundings. And but they are still there, a little bit overgrown, and well, there's very fine and romantic parts in the park. There's not very much maintenance, but the only thing that you have to be aware of is animals. Badgers like to dug holes in the slopes of this fortress, and so do rabbits. And well, you have to repair this kind of things. But the problem is badgers are also protected. So well, there is always a little bit of a struggle between the necessary maintenance and the other things that you have to deal with, like protected animals. The next one. Well, again, the park. Important to keep the young trees out, and there are many. There are 180 kilometers of walkways in the park, and the only maintenance is that they have to be mown about 4 times a year with a tractor. This is not much work, but of course essential to keep the park open and accessible for the public. It's a complete difference with the formal garden, where you need 35 volunteers and 16 gardeners, and in the park area with more than 600 hectares, there are only 9 gardeners. So you can see a bit the difference in maintenance, but it's still a very fine area. The next one, please. Well, climate change can do a lot of damage to historic gardens. You can see the Versailles garden here this summer, and I think there is a lack of watering possibilities there, and then formal gardens can suffer enormously from this. And well, I hope they can solve this in a way, but I think they will need a lot of investments to keep the garden in the future in a good condition. The next one and the last one. Well, this is the newly planted parterre in the Low Garden, at Low Gardens, the King's Garden, completely replanted with modern new box varieties that look lookalikes of the old boxes sempervirens. These box varieties are developed by the Herplant nurseries in Belgium. There's a lot of research, and they are sustainable. They can't be hit by the box blight, and the caterpillars, the box moth, doesn't like it as well. We have tested it also with infected plants next to it, and I think we are very happy with the results. And well, I think this is a good something good for the future of formal gardens, that we can use box again without the problems that the old box had. So this is what I want to tell about maintenance and a short walk through the park and the gardens of Het Loo. Well, success on with the conference, and perhaps there are some questions.
Thank you, Willem, for this extremely interesting, as always, presentation. You have shown us that resilience of the historic sites is dependent only to us, to the professionals and the gardeners and the volunteers and so on. But also what is really significant in your case, in case of the Het Loo Palace, is that we should never forget that the restoration is a process, and it might be sometimes redefined, and it should be sometimes redefined, as your case is showing. So thank you once again for your presentation. I would like now, because we have got a few minutes, I would like now to ask our audience if there are any maybe questions to ask live. I don't see any, or even I don't hear any. So I guess everything was clear.
Oh, I hope it was clear by then. So,
Thank
okay.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Success.
Hello. I'm not sure.
Yes, you are with us.
Yeah. And please welcome another special guest, Ibo Gulsen. Please start your presentation, yes?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we
The
do.
audio work? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Just to double check, right? All right. Well, thank you for the invitation to share a different perspective, perhaps, on gardens and gardens development. After all, the gardens are to serve an audience, and that audience used to be probably the rich and the famous and royalty, but now gardens have opened to many people around the world to enjoy. Which is basically developed in well, I would call it an industry of garden tourism. And it's my pleasure to share some experiences on garden tourism with you today. So you can start the presentation if you want. Waiting for the screen.
Actually, I did not receive your presentation from the first panels.
But that's no problem. I think I can share it on my computer. Mhm.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, let me go full screen. Yeah, it works.
Perfect.
Right, let's get started. Just a brief introduction. My name is Ibo Gulsen. I'm the owner of a company called IGMPR, and we work for gardens and flower festivals around the world to develop attractions, horticultural attractions. And we create often these kind of, we call them immersive blooming objects and flower culture experiences to really attract a large crowd of people. We're based in the Netherlands. We started our work in Asia and moved our way westwards. So now we're doing shows and festivals around the world. And I'm also the vice chairman of the World's Tulip Society, which is a network of tulip parks and festivals around the world. And we gather every 2 years to share our experiences. And I'm also the vice chairman of the International Garden Tourism Network. So there's a network of gardens around the world that focus on attracting visitors and tourists. And also we organize a biannual conference, which is just starting up now after COVID. You can see more about these organizations on the links I share in the presentation here. This is just a few examples of our work. Like I said, we create new flower experiences. So we bring flowers to a higher level so people can immerse themselves in it, and that creates beautiful photo moments. But it's not only about the flowers, we also want to tell the story about the culture of flowers. Basically, why do we love flowers, and how is that appreciation expressed in all kinds of different forms of art throughout history. The topics I would like to share with you today is, just setting the scene, a very brief history of gardens. I mean, this can be a lecture almost in itself for days. Then go specifically into garden tourism, some trends and developments we see over the past 100 years, but also more recently, and the challenges and the opportunities you have as a garden once you decide to attract visitors or tourists. So let me start off with a very brief introduction of the history of gardens. We're all in the same industry and we share the same passion, but I think it's good to make some distinction of where we all basically come from. So if you look at gardens, the concept of gardens, I mean, we started around 9,000 years before Christ with agriculture, and basically cultivating crops to eat, or sometimes as medicine. But around 2000, and even earlier, 3000 before Christ, you saw also the first cultural appreciation for flowers and plants and the cultivation of gardens. So that is basically for no other use than aesthetics or religious motives to create a garden or an appreciation for flowers that is not only expressed by growing them, but also transforming them in different kinds of arts, decorative arts, fine arts, etc. So if you see it, what is the purpose of the garden is, on the one hand, you see it's ornamental. So it's basically a planned and a designed space based on culturally or religiously defined motives and appreciation for flowers, plants, landscapes, of which its main function is aesthetics. We just do this because we think it's beautiful, which is different from the traditional, let's say, botanical garden, which is more scientific. We collect plants from all over the world and we propagate them, we research them, we educate people, we preserve, and sometimes we even use them to adapt them to different climates once we got them from some other place. And then there's the garden, I call it the produce garden, kitchen garden, as you know them. So that's basically a collection of plants of which its main function is to harvest its produce, which can be for food or for medicine. And throughout the years, of course, we've seen gradual mixes of these different purposes or functions of gardens. But it is interesting to see that basically all around the world, independently, the concept of a garden has developed. A lot of that started in Central Asia, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in Persia, and then gradually in the 15th, 16th century, we saw this huge influx of exchanges between East and West that basically inspired each other. And then the first botanical gardens came into existence in Europe. I think the one in Padua is one of the first ones, but actually it's followed quite quickly with other botanical gardens across Europe, related to obviously to universities. And then we had this massive appreciation with the beautiful gardens of Willem and Paleis and other Renaissance gardens, which became fashion at that time. We see other trends developed, like the landscape gardens, and now we have very modern gardens where there's no specific rule to follow in terms of design or planning. It's all up to creativity of people, and once you come back to why do we love this nature, we see a specific role for flowers, because it's basically a kind of an ultimate connection between mankind and nature. And you see that in every culture. I mean, it's very interesting to see, if you look at the different forms of art, you can see almost similar visuals of people sniffing a flower or enjoying a flower or want to be associated because it has a symbol of status or of appreciation. And that is basically scattered all around the world. And this appreciation has developed quite independently from each other as well. So it's not only in the visual arts, it's in the decorative arts, from processions to fashion to paintings, ceramics, you name it. Everywhere where you basically look, you can see flowers or nature. So what we see, especially if you want to attract tourists, flowers are really the best option to use, because people are simply attracted by it, and it addresses the interest of a broad audience, even those people who are let's say, kind of disconnected from gardening or nature. Even though they don't know anything about flowers, they can't even tell that this is a tulip. They really like it. And by telling the stories that this appreciation for flowers is represented all around us, and it's universal, they will realize that they are part of something special, something that makes them human, basically. So that's a very brief history of the gardens, but I think it's important to realize to ask yourself the question: why are people attracted to nature and to gardens? Because if you want to attract people, you need to understand their motives and where does it come from. So when we talk about garden tourism, sometimes people think, yeah, this is a group of people, of gardeners that are, really into gardens, and they visit gardens all around the world. Well, that's actually a very small group of the tourists that most gardens receive. I call it the specialty garden lover. But the main public that visit gardens, they usually don't have much gardening or horticultural experience or knowledge, but they come to visit botanical gardens, historical gardens, and places that offer these garden experience, including festivals and events, for a variety of purposes. And we call it basically, it's cultural tourism. We come for education, relaxation, inspiration. So garden tourism is basically part of a broader travel segment of cultural tourism. And the purpose of the garden as such, I mean, every garden has usually its own mission and vision. And I think this one in Atlanta Botanical formulates it quite well. So, yeah, we want to be an oasis, which people come to relax and get inspired by awakening the senses with its stunning natural beauty and connecting the soul with nature, and where people come to feel human again. And if you look at, let's say, the industry or the business side of garden tourism, you will see that there's around the world, there are probably like 100 places, a little bit more, that consistently attract 1 or 2 million visitors per year. And we really have to distinguish, at least we distinguish gardens as a tourism destination from, example, a public park, which is free. Once it becomes a tourism destination, you basically have a fence, a gate around it, which charges an admission, or at least it's controlled. So they charge admission fees to visitors. And of course, it depends in which country you are and what kind of regulations there are. But, the entrance fee, it varies basically from, let's say, €5 to €20 on average. And they serve a mix of audiences. Some gardens really cater to a local audience. Some have a broader national function, or even have become really an international tourism attraction. And it was also good to keep in mind that people spend at max half a day in the garden. Technically, they can spend all day if they would see and do everything. But usually it's around 2 to 4 hours that people spend in the garden. And the size, it depends per garden. We usually see it's around 10 to 30 hectare. Can be bigger, can even be smaller, because in the end, you don't need a huge space to accommodate 1 or 2 million people per year. And the ownership and the operation model of gardens, it differs also. You have some really private operated gardens. I mean, most of them are non-profits. There's some commercial gardens, but they still operate independently. Or they're gardens that are really part of, let's say, a local or national government institution or organization. So they're different models in terms of ownership and operation. Just to give you some indications of what kind of gardens attract these kind of numbers. I think by the Gardens by the Bay, I'm not sure if you're familiar, it's been developed exactly 10 years now. They celebrate their 10th anniversary. You have these super trees. It's been a huge development, and it really put Singapore, let's say, on the map. And they have 2 conservatories in there, and the size of the conservatories are about 2 hectares. And only on that 2 hectares of conservatory space, they receive 3.6 million visitors, paying visitors per year. We have the Kew Gardens in the UK, 1.8, Wisley, Eden, and then a special one is the Keukenhof in the Netherlands, which has 1.4 pre-COVID, but actually this year they already came back to about 1.1 million visitors in just 2 months. And it's quite different from all the other gardens that operate more or less year-round. Keukenhof only operates for 2 months a year, and they receive 1.4 million visitors in that period. Trautmannsdorf in Italy is a smaller garden, but also only open for 8 months a year, 500,000 visitors. In China, there are a number of flower parks and gardens that easily receive 1 to 2 million visitors per year, like in Dafeng. Atlanta Botanical, close to 1 million now. Longwood, very famous one, over 1.5 million. Yeah, well, some people call it not even a garden, but it's a very special experience. The Miracle Garden in Dubai, about 1.5. Mino Island, 1.2. New York Botanical, 1.2. And there's, of course, many more. But it shows that it's actually quite a big industry. And I think if you would add up all the garden tourists visiting gardens per year, you're easily talking about a couple hundred people visiting gardens. And that's quite unique because people don't know that from each other. In the end, it's way more than the theme parks of Disneyland and Universal. Going back to the trends and developments we saw in the, well, let's start with some really long historical trends, which I think really had a big impact on gardens and experiencing gardens. If you look in Europe, with the Romans and the Greeks, they had an appreciation for flowers. Then the Middle Ages came, which not much was happening at that time, between 500 and 1500, besides some medicinal gardens. But when this exchange between East and West came around in the 16th century, between the Ottoman Empire and the first diplomats from Europe that had an exchange, they saw these lush gardens and flowers they've never seen, and that created a complete new appreciation and revival of appreciation for gardens and flowers. And well, you see what happened in Europe with the botanical gardens, the Renaissance gardens that followed shortly afterwards. So there was one trend. So we started to love and appreciate flowers and gardens again after the Dark Middle Ages. And then fast forwarding to the 19th and the 20th century, we basically see, I call it the emancipation of gardens. So gardens is, I mean, used to be really for the rich and the famous and the royalty, but gardens became accessible for the working and the middle class. Of course, first they started to grow, fruit and vegetables in their garden, but the ornamental aspect of the garden came into development at the end of the 19th century, and especially I would say in the second half of the 20th century. We saw a change that from private to public, that the privy gardens basically that belong to an estate or a castle, basically an historical garden, were opened to the general public. So they become, in that sense, a destination or an activity for tourists. And then a major trend, which is kind of, more or less ruining everything, is the urbanization. So we started, instead of living in houses where you have space, where you have a garden and can grow stuff, and you had the time to do it, we now live in cities and high-rise apartment buildings, and there's no space for gardens, to have your own garden, and there's no time, and in some cases there's also no money to maintain and have a garden. So we are dealing with new generations of people that have actually very little knowledge or experience with plants and flowers, which is, I wouldn't say necessarily a very good thing. But what we saw well, actually this was happening already pre-COVID, but I think COVID kind of spurred it, kind of strengthened it. We see the desire to connect with nature. It's never been so big. And the pandemic in that sense helped with it. And especially with younger generations, they find new ways to appreciate plants and flowers. If you look at this whole, social media popularity of these bloggers of indoor plants, of house plants, like Urban Jungle, they have more than 1 million followers worldwide. There are many bloggers about doing plants indoor in your house, etc. So there is really an interest to connect with nature. And what we saw also with many of the gardens, if they were allowed to open during the pandemic, they had the best visitation ever. Of course, it was because people had no other place to go. But now the key challenge is how do we make sure all those people are coming back to the gardens? So how can we seize that moment and make sure the garden is not only a space between a place, but a place and destination in itself? And then there are a number of factors to consider that basically apply to gardens, but in general to any kind of leisure or tourism destination. I call that the destination formula. So this basically the attraction value. So what makes people come to you? And in the end, that also represents a monetary value. I mean, in the end, what are people willing to pay to come to your garden, and how they value it to come over? And that's basically a combination of the quality of the experience. So what am I going to see? What am I going to do? How special is it? How wow is it? In relation to the time that people spend. I mean, sometimes people travel hours just to see something really special or nice, which maybe the whole experience lasts 10 or 15 minutes, but it's so special. I have to come there and I'm willing to pay a lot for it, but also spend a lot of time in getting there. Otherwise, in general, I'd say, I'm going to visit the garden. It's going to be nice. It's going to be special. But I might spend like 2 hours there because if it's too short, and that relates really to the travel time, there's this another golden rule that we usually say that the time you spend in any attraction should at least be equal to the travel time that people have to travel back and forth to. So I'm not going to spend 3 hours traveling to visit a destination where I'm only going to spend like 1 hour, unless it's very special, or unless it's part of a bigger program in a city of combining a visit to a museum or to a concert and a visit to the garden. And you really have to think about your target audience, because you have people with different interests. I see I have 2 minutes left. That's good to know. So I'll speed it up. So you have to balance your audiences with the time they can actually spend on leisure. So you have weekends, you have weekdays, and people have time to spend on leisure in the weekends or in holidays. So you have to balance that. And then when you're a garden outdoor, where there's no climate control, you have to balance the seasonality of your attraction in the garden to the seasonality in the way people spend their leisure time. So in terms of challenges and opportunities, I see many gardens have a transportation issue because most historical gardens, especially historical gardens, were not developed as a tourism destination. So they lack the required infrastructure in terms of parking or public transport. And even though the garden is big enough, if you only have 500 parking spaces for cars in the parking lot, you cannot have not more than, let's say, 1,500 people at any time in the garden. And you need to have a reason to come and a reason actually to come back, because a garden in itself is quite static. It can be wow, but if you come back next year, probably looks the same. And so why should I come back, or why should I come now? And of course, it depends very much on the organization, but there is the business model has an impact as well. Are there any political or regulatory limitations to create sources of income? Flexible emission fees, you can do events or F&B or retail. And as the cost of the garden is mostly fixed, you'll have to focus on optimizing and increasing your visitation, because basically every extra visitor is pure income. There's no variable cost. And I think people need to understand that the garden is there for the public, but it's not a public park, which is considered being something for free. And then there's you need staff that understand this Imagineering process, where you can learn how to tell stories and how to create creative displays and create new experiences and match that all with the capabilities of the garden. So here are some examples of the once in a lifetime experience, I would say, with some really unique features like the Keukenhof. There's no place in the world where you can see 7 million tulips in bloom. The Quarry Garden in Bush artists would say, and I would say a lot of the historical gardens, Renaissance gardens, it's an immense and great experience. But if you come back next year, it's more or less the same. Well, if you do the shows and events and changing exhibitions like Chelsea or Gardens by the Bay or Atlanta, I need 30 seconds, then I'm done. That's a way to attract new visitors. So the opportunity is to balance your peak capacity with the interest and the availability of your different target groups, create attraction value and build up your visitor journey based on your target audience and your seasonality. And you don't need to do everything yourself. You can work with growers, external growers, with artists, with designers, F&B suppliers to create new experiences and leverage cost. In a nutshell, that was it for the presentation. I realize I'm over time. I'm sorry for that, but nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much
Yeah.
for your very interesting presentation. Connecting with tourist gardening, yes, it's a very nice problem with historical garden. And now, please, Martin, it's your turn, please.
Yes, hello. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and can you please launch the presentation? Okay, I want to thank you, my pre-speakers, because it was really excellent presentations and showcases how the landscape architecture can be. Basically, what I want to is to offer you another view to consider in your work, because I'm from a different field of research. My name is Martin Tušer. I'm coming from Czech Republic. I've got basically two roles at the moment. First is that I'm president of an NGO, which is dealing with protection of large trees. And I'm chief researcher and business developer of our company with my wife, which is called Ledasco, and our project is called Treeib, and I will tell you later. I wanted to focus more to how to make urban trees or urban landscape more resilient, as it was my task. And I would like to ask you for the second slide, please. A quite nice thing to do is to be a bit interactive. So there's a kind of new feature for my presentation. And I would like to all from the audience, if you are willing to, try to answer to the chat, how many trees do I have to plant to replace one large tree? Because we are losing large trees, big trees. And I just want to show you how many we have to plant to replace one large one. And I've got the example later down. Next slide, please. Basically, next slide, please. This is about large trees today and how can we help them. And well, okay, I did some local research in Poland. By the way, very nice weather in Krakow today. I'm missing to be there in person. But anyway, today we celebrate around the world large, beautiful, old, kind of special trees. We've got large Facebook and other social media groups which are admiring trees, and you can wake up every morning and to go to your feet and like so many very nice big trees. But that's it. But you know, what I want to offer you to shift from tree likers or huggers to tree carers. So this is very important to consider. Well, it's okay. So my point of view is a bit shift of the paradigm as you maybe see it today. And I would like to ask you for the next slide. Okay. You know, I did quite extensive research how to what is the ratio between large trees and small trees. I will tell you the story. This is starting with my personal garden. We've got a large property with large trees, and I wanted to plant some new ones. It was something like 8 years ago, and it was so difficult because the drought period came to the Czech Republic. And the old trees started to die off, and at the same time we were landscapers at the first time. The second time we were distributors or sellers of watering bags for newly planted trees. So I was experiencing all the issues with our clients, which were cities, that basically the planting initiatives, they didn't work, and they don't work very much at the moment because trees were dying because of drought, heat, and all this stuff. Okay, so in 2020, a new study was published by American scientists, and it was the first hit how to, you know, approach the problem that, you know, we've got large trees in the cities, or we've got established trees in the cities, but we do care only for newly planted trees, which are dying, by the way. So Professor Moumont from the Tufts University, he presented the new study, and it's quite amazing number. I would recommend to read it maybe later, the presentation, which you can download from the link I'm showing at the end and at the beginning of the presentation. Well, okay, they studied something about 600,000 trees in the forests of the US in a couple of spots, and they measured trees, every stem, and they calculate carbon stored in these trees. And what was very fascinating, and still it is fascinating, is that 43% of carbon is stored in 3% of stems, which means that from climate change mitigation adaptation point of view, and I will say very short, the value of large tree is significantly larger than small ones or newly planted ones. Next slide, please. The problem is that we can't. Next slide, please. We cannot grow these large trees in the cities anymore. So the Professor Moumont defined a new term, which is called proforestation, which basically means, from point of view of climate change, let these established trees grow. You know, And I would like to recommend to download the presentation, then study more about this topic. Well, okay. When we calculated the number, how many trees do we have to plant to replace one large tree? We got a couple of results, and you know, we are trying to combat climate and mitigate it with planting trees, but there are some other important data we've got, hard data, about how everything works. First of all, when you do a calculation of the whole life cycle of newly planted tree in a city, you can calculate that carbon neutrality comes after 30 years after planting, you know. So we think, you know, we have to plant a lot of trees because we need to fight the climate change, but basically we are harming the atmosphere because it produces so much CO2 that carbon neutrality of newly planted tree comes after 30 years. But these numbers were calculated in the US when the planting stock was transported only 80 kilometers away from the planting site. But for example, in Czech Republic, and I believe in Poland, many countries around Europe, it's quite normal that we are planting trees which were produced, let's say, 1,000 kilometers away from the planting site. We import trees from Italy, from Holland, you know, and many other countries, which means that the carbon footprint of planting new trees is much more bigger, and the carbon neutrality can come much more later. And what's another issue in terms of planting new trees is that we replace large trees with smaller cultivars just because of practical things, or we cannot stand maybe large tree in the particular spot because of the buildings or utility pipes. Next slide, please. So it's time to review your answers, and I'm looking for a chat, and I don't see any answers. Fortunately, okay, no problem. Okay. So, well, Elsa, 10. Thank you. 100. Okay. Can I have somebody else? Maybe not. Okay, I will not. I will not prolong it anymore. So please, next slide. We can look the problem in different views. What we did together with Willem, who is Nobel Prize holder because he was leading IPCC climate panels, intergovernmental panels for 5 rounds. So we did a calculation about carbon stored in tissues of above and below the ground biomass of one large tree, which is real tree from Massachusetts. It's red oak, and it has height of 30 meters and DBH about 1.3 meters, which is basically 100 years old tree. And if you calculate the amount of carbon stored in smaller trees, which got a couple of categories according to DBH, and I don't have a pointer here, unfortunately. But anyway, if you go to DBH 5 centimeters, which is a normal size planted in cities, height of 3 meters, and let's say 14, 16 centimeters in around age 7, you have to plant 3,000 trees to replace carbon stored in large tree. But it's not all. If you burn the wood from the large tree, which means that you release carbon stored in this tree to the atmosphere, you have to double the number. So now you've got about 6,000 trees to plant. And then if you calculate mortality of the tree, you can easily come to 10,000 trees to plant to replace such a tree. Please, next slide. And I don't talk about the smaller trees, which is about 50,000 trees to plant to replace the carbon. This is another interpretation of data. Basically, carbon stored in the large tree. This is the first one. And you can see that this kind of tree can hold about 7 tons of carbon, which is equivalent of 25.5 thousand kilograms of CO2. And if you go down in the tree age from 100 to let's say 30, 16 to 7, you can easily see that the carbon stored in a smaller tree, like 3 meters in height, which we plant in the cities, is 8 kilograms of CO2 in comparison to 25 tons. Okay, please, next slide. This is another point of view. This is carbon sequestered by a particular tree size within 1 year. Just if we assume that the tree grows well. And again, the same 3 categories, which means that the large oak we've got in an example can sequester just by average about 250 kilograms of CO2 per year. But a small tree like this H7, which you plant in the cities, is about 3 or 4 kilograms of CO2 per year. Again, big comparison. The point is, you can never replace a tree which is fall down or cut down in a city. The conclusion is you have to keep, if you want to make cities resilient, you have to keep these trees growing, because you can never replace them with new plantings. But there's quite important point to stress in terms of annual carbon sequestration. Everything depends on how the tree grows. This is not tackling only carbon sequestration, but it tackles almost all ecosystem services provided by trees. And you know, if you want to make the city resilient in time of climate change, you have to get ecosystem services from trees. Next slide, please. I was mentioning the growth of tree. We modeled different grow rates for 2 tree categories. On the left, the table down, there is the oak tree, our example. And on the right-hand side, there is oak about 30 years old, 15 meters in height. And in every table, you've got annual increment of trunk diameter, which can differ very much, and annual height gain, which can differ very much. And on the left row, column, sorry, is the carbon sequestration per year rate. You know, so basically, the large tree in average can sequester 250 kilograms of CO2, but if it grows well, we can easily go to 1 ton per year. And if on the right-hand side, the tree grows extremely well, this 30 years old tree, 12 millimeters of trunk increment. This is kind of sci-fi. You can't reach it normally. It's about 400 kilograms per year. It means that large trees are like enormous machine of tree adaptation mitigation, climate change adaptation mitigation in cities, especially because they produce another co-benefits and ecosystem services which we need, like noise reduction, all this stuff. Okay, next slide, please. And this is something what I mentioned. This is the assessment of life cycle of urban tree. You've got a whole identification of the study and the carbon neutrality after 26 or 33 years, depending on tree care scheme they used. The main question is the planting of new trees in the city is a good solution to the climate change. I hope that after presenting these data, you can agree with me that it's not really a good solution. We definitely need planting new trees, but if we plant a lot of trees, we are harming, basically in every tree planted, we are harming the atmosphere and our situation. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just, for your reading later. I'm not alone. For example, Jeremy Burrell from the UK, he totally agrees. There is another kind of estimate, which means basically if you cut down tree after 80 years, you're losing 75% of total benefits, which are possible to get from one tree. Next slide, please. Well, and now we are coming to how to protect these trees which are already growing. And in my understanding and observation, almost nobody around the world put their attention to these specimens of trees, which were planted, let's say, 80 years after the Second World War. And now they are being removed because of new development and common belief that if we plant a new tree in a city, it's 1-to-1 in ratio. We cut down one tree and we have to plant one tree, that we replace the value, which is absolutely not possible. Okay, and I'm speaking to many people around the world, arboriculture, climate change, and all this stuff. And Klaus Kerber mentioned quite interesting number. 70% of the problems in the city trees is caused by lack of water. There are definitely other problems which arboriculture solves, like compacted soil and all this stuff. But 70% is a quite good estimate, you know. And I know that, for example, now there is quite warm weather in the majority of Europe. Now I'm presenting from outside of my house because I wanted to use a daylight. And, you know, it's very nice to have such an autumn day as today, but something is wrong. You know, we've got a lot of problems in our world today, but the truth is that climate change is present and it doesn't go away. Next slide, please. Well, okay, so if there is a problem, people try to solve it. So there are different kind of attempts how to water trees. You know, basically it's using watering bags by the trunk, by the stem, killing for the tree. Then watering by bucket, for example, you know, 7 or 10 liters of water per tree by base, wasting your energy and time, basically, in short, in terms of science. Then on the right upper picture, there is a soaking hose or dripping hose around the tree. Let's say the most efficient way how to water tree. That's true. It's a picture from California. Łukasz, this is not possible. I can't cover this topic in such in such a short time. Okay. Okay, so inefficient and bad way how to water trees. Next slide, please. Well, okay, because what we want, this is a drawing of root system, which is naturally developed by tree of 3.5 meters in height oak, somewhere in the middle of Europe. You can see it has a diameter of 10 meters. Next slide, please. Well, okay. What's happening if you try to water a tree by stem? These are actual pictures from 2020, Salt Lake City. I spoke to this local chapter of S.R.O, and the result, the conclusion was quite clear. The uprooting of 50,000 trees in few hours in Salt Lake City region was caused by watering of lawns, you know, every day, small amount of water. And next slide, please, because it causes shallow rooting. So what to do? What's the better? On the right hand side, you can see ideal watering zone for a tree, because you need to water tree by expected edge, outer edge of the root system. Otherwise, the roots die very quickly. Next slide, please. It's next slide, please. Well, okay. And you can, next slide, please. You can see on this picture how the root system reacts to watering below the ground or by stem. Basically, it can move very quickly and get smaller very quickly, and the tree gets unstable and can be uprooted by wind, for example. And if you think that this is, let's say, 50 years old, 50 years, taking 50 years process, this is not true. This is about 3, yeah, and my timer is over. It's a matter of 3 or 5 years when you can really destroy the tree. And I know that I'm running out of time. I've got a lot of things to say more, but I would like to ask maybe organizers to go to end or to the end of the presentation. Okay, it's a long time. Or maybe it's better I will send. Yeah. There's basically a description of our method how to water trees. So if the topic is interesting for you, then go to this address. I will share it maybe to you into chat later. Yeah, you can here you can scan the QR code. I prepared a web page only for this conference, and you can download my presentation, which is absolutely not possible to present into 20 minutes. I'm so sorry, but if it is interesting for you, just write me, contact me, and we can talk about that much more longer time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin. It was absolutely interesting and fascinating, I think, your research. So thank you. Thank you.
You know,
And please put information on the chat, maybe.
Okay. You know, I want to ask you to really think about these numbers and to spread the voice, you know, the message. Because it's so important when I talk about that to, let's say, our people and all these people, the topic resonates around this group. But this is not enough. We have to bridge knowledge of science to daily praxis adaptation, you know. And I don't know how to explain it deeper, but hopefully the numbers talk better, you know. Okay. Anyway, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, and I hope see you soon.
Okay, see you soon.
Yes, thank you, Martin, once again. And just shortly, because we are already out of time, just shortly to summarize the presentation of Ibo and Martin. The voice of Ibo was also very important because of the importance of the economic income from the tourism, which is helpful to maintain the garden, but also, in my opinion, mobility and tourism is helpful in raising awareness of the importance of garden heritage, which is really important. And Martin has already showed us that we should revise our way of thinking, that instead of quantity of planting trees in the cities or general everywhere, we should fix into the quality of our work and the plant material as well. And now we are going back once again to Czech Republic. We are going to visit a very amazing garden that is listed on the UNESCO list. And now I would like to welcome Michaela Leta, that will tell us about the challenges of maintaining the historic site that is listed on the UNESCO list. Michaela, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, it's nice to be here. Can we launch the presentation, please? Oh, great. Next slide, please. Today, I'm going to talk about complex in Kromeriz. Kromeriz are located in Moravia in Czech Republic. Next, please. It's a complex that's enlisted as a UNESCO site since 1998. It consists of Baroque residence, and two gardens, which are in the same city, but are very different. The first one on the left side is a flower garden, which is a yearly Baroque style garden. And the second, the Chateau garden, is English landscape park, very large English landscape park. So two gardens, very different, but we have to maintain them somehow. Next time, please. Next slide, please. They are connected with this person. This is Bishop Charles Lichtenstein of Castellcorn, the bishop who came to Kromeriz at the end of 17th century, and he reconstructed the castle in its current Baroque shape, and he founded also flower garden. Next slide. At first, I will talk about a brief history of the gardens, because after it, I want to talk about not only the maintenance, but also about our current problems, but that are most likely our challenges of today that are connected not only with the climate change, but also with the energy crisis and so on. So the flower garden, next slide. It originated in the end of 17th century, typical formal garden aligned around one main axis of symmetry. Next. It's divided into two main parts, flower garden on the top, and on the lower part there's ornamental orchard. Next. On the side of the garden, there are rooms that are dedicated to plants and to animals. We have also menagerie here. Next. From the time of finishing of the garden at the end of 17th century, we have set of engravings. This is one of them that shows us the central pavilion, the rotunda in its original state. And I will talk about these engravings later, but they were very helpful for us when we prepared the project of restoration, because we knew how the garden looked like shortly after its finishing. So really important source of graphic information. Next. The garden in its concept, main concept, stayed in its original form from the end of 17th century, but of course some changes were made through the history, mostly in the mid 19th century, at the time of Archbishop S.R.O, who not only changed the main entrance, but also originated many plantings of the trees and other changes. This is the design from the mid 20th century, when the current heritage care tried to restore the garden to its original state from the end of 17th century. This is the original design of one of the important Czech architects of Pavel Janák. Next slide. And this is his design today. For most of the visitors, this is the typical Baroque garden. They came here to see the Baroque. But in truth, this is not Baroque design. This is the design from the mid of 20th century by Pavel Janák, who inspired himself in the Baroque symmetry, Baroque broderies and everything. But it's a really modern design, but of a high quality. So we are protecting it as a part of the development of the garden, but it's really not a Baroque. And this parterre is very hard to maintain for us, because it's made of box shrubs. And as already my colleague from Hetlo said, we have also problems with fungus disease. We are for now trying new varieties from Belgium also, but for now the biggest problems of them, it's not a resistance, it's fine, but the biggest problems are frost resistance. We have quite a big frost in winter, sometimes around -10 or 20 degrees of Celsius. So this is the biggest problems for us, and we will see in next few years if we are able to use them for this type of garden. Next slide. This is the picture from the ornamental orchard, which is still waiting from its restoration. Next. Because up to 2015, we had a big project of restoration, some parts of the gardens. I will show you a few pictures of it, but it was it also consisted a part of, next slide, of foundation of a new center. Next. Yes, this is the picture of the restoration. Next. Because we knew that to restore the garden, it's not enough. We have to gather the experiences and to pass it to the public, to discuss it with our colleagues. So our center is trying to use this experience, help other gardens, and also propagate the historical garden to the public and other colleagues. Next slide. The biggest problem for now is water in both of the gardens, so I will talk about it further. At the bottom of the page, you can see the original picture of the garden from the end of 17th century, and you can see their big water basin outside the garden walls. It's not here anymore. Next slide. But what's still here is the original water system from this period of time. It's still working. Next slide, please. But not to distribute the water anymore. It's more like a drainage system for now. But it's arch underground channel still here. Next slide. This is the development of the water system from the mid-19th century at the time of Maximilian Somero Beck. That's why it's called Maximilian channels. And it's still working system that drain the water from the nearby hills to a flower garden mostly. In spring and in autumn, we can still use it as a source of water. It's a problem in summer when it's not raining, there's no water that this system can bring to the garden. Next slide. There you can see our archaeologist in this arched channel, which is accessible in its whole length. Next slide. Next slide. And that brings us to the problem that we try to solve during the project, because we plant 3 water reservoirs that are underground, so the visitors can't see them, but we can use it to water the garden. Next slide. And there you can see that you can't see anything, in fact, but the water reservoir is here and it's used for watering the plants. Next slide. We also built a new greenhouse for propagating plants. Next slide. Because all of the annuals and biennials used in those flower beds I showed you before are propagated in this glass house. It's great before we don't have to rely on other sources, and also we can ensure the quality of the plants. When this glass house was built, we also wanted to control the energies, we wanted to control temperature and so on. So this whole building is controlled by the central computer system. Next slide. And it's the same for the original 2 greenhouses from mid-19th century, which temperatures are also controlled by this system. Next. And that's why we can keep our very valuable collection of subtropical plants in a good conditions. Next slide. Also in the project where the foundation of flowering meadows in the places of former menagerie, it had 2 reasons. The first is that it's very authentic, because in Baroque time they didn't have pure lawns, they had flowering meadows. That's one of the reasons. The second is that it's very attractive for the visitors. Next slide. Because the colors and plants are changing through the years, so they have the reason to come back to see other plants. Next slide. And it's a reason they come back. Next slide. And there's some problem with the presentation, but I hope it will get back. But the next reason is economy, because these meadows are moved twice a year, so it doesn't require so much manpower and energies to it. And we also observe them, so we can explain to visitors what's going on here, why it's this way, why there are weeds, how it's working. And it's also important part. Next slide. And also it's support the biodiversity of the garden, which is the other side quite formal, and in this place we can have the insects, we have plants. Next slide. I will now talk a little bit about the second garden, the Chateau Garden, which is now big landscape park in area more than 50 hectares. Next slide. At first, it used to be Renaissance garden next, then early Baroque garden next, until in mid-19th century it became in the current area of 55 hectares. You can see on this map that water plays an important part in the design of the garden. We have three big ponds interconnected with a system of ground channels connected with River Morava that's floating outside the garden. Next slide. So here you can see some pictures from the garden. Next slide. So you can understand how big the garden is, because in flower garden it's mostly about details, to maintain the details in a high quality. The chateau garden, it's most likely about harmony of the whole, about big spaces, about big groups of trees. This is one of the biggest trees, biggest group of plant trees in our republic. Next slide. There you can see the River Morava floating around the garden. It was regulated in 20th century, but it caused us problems sometimes. Next. This is the pictures from big floods in 1997. It's not problem only Kromeriz. There used to be big damages in the whole Moravian region. The water in the chateau garden stayed for more than a week, like 2 weeks. So it caused big damages to trees, because its root system cannot breathe this time for quite a long period of time. Next slide. And because of that, many of them died. They fell in just after the floods, but even if in the following years. So big problem, we had to replant quite a lot. Next. But on the other side, this was the problem caused by a big amount of water. For now, we are facing the lack of water. So in 2018, it was prepared a project to restore the original water system in the garden. It's for ponds and part of the water channels. It was finished this year, so I'm going to show you some pictures from the process. These are pictures from the restoration of Hodor pond. We have problem with water erosion, because the shores were somewhere totally else than there used to be. So we restored it. We also created little zones for plants and insects as a part of this project. Next. This is after the finishing of the works. Next. There were big amount of alluvial material. We used a lot of it to create new shores of the channels. Next. Next. And this is the picture of the restored channel. It's important not only to have the original feature from the mid-19th century, it's also very important for microclimate of the garden, because even that we are close to the River Morava, within its regulation came the lowering of the level of the water underground. So the trees have quite a big problem to get the water from the underground, and we need to create conditions for them as best as we can. Next slide. This is the picture from the pond above the colonnade. Next slide. And also in channels, we are thinking about plants, so little zones are created also in these channels. Next slide. This is one of the main channel called mill channel. It was created in 18th century and was restored. Next picture. Next. With the original cascade that is working again now. This picture is here also because I wanted to show you our spring effect of ephemeres and ephemeroids, which are also very attractive, not only for visitors, but also for insects and other animals. Next, and given that we had problems with the water, this spring effect was poorer and poorer through the years, and we are hoping that with this water system restoration, there will be greater humidity, and this spring effect of the plants would be better. Another big problem here is mistletoe. Because we have 3,500 trees in a garden, and most of them are limes, maples. So the species that are quite that have problems with mistletoe. This is one of the main tree alleys made of lime by the long pond. It's very strongly infected, and for now we are trying to prepare a project to get rid of it because it's really destroying the important trees and groups in our garden. We are going to use not only pruning the infected branches, but also to use other systems like stimulants and so on, because in the cases of some trees, pruning out infected branches would mean to prune whole tree. There wouldn't be any tree left after these works were done. So we are trying also with this, but it's a project for next few years and it's in the stage of preparation for now. Next slide. In our experience, it's also very important to inform public, not only discuss these problems with our colleagues, but also discuss it with public. And most likely we are working with groups, not only of adults, but also with groups of children. Next slide. Because in Kromeriz we have very great potential that we have formal garden where we can talk about, I don't know, geography, math, physics, and also we have a chateau garden where we can talk about biology, zoology, ecology. Next slide. So we really can talk about everything about life in the foreign times, in history. Next slide. Showing them. Next slide. So the children can really experience the garden. We can teach them the garden art history. Next slide. But it's really important to speak in a correct language, because when you are talking to a child or an adult, it's really different. You have to improvise a lot. Next slide. But when you experience it, then where you can taste it or you can smell it. Next slide. It's really big experience, so the children will remember it and they can tell, yeah, I were there, so it's great, we have to protect it, and that's the thing we want to ensure. Next slide. I'm almost at the end. And children can design their own garden, because it's not about listening, it's also about thinking about it. Next slide. About exploring. Next slide. And doing something of yourself, because when we doesn't teach people to the values of those historic gardens and the values of sustainability, there's nothing we can do to ensure it. And next slide, and I think that's the last one. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mihala. And I would like to thank our distinguished guest in session first. Yes. So now, Łukasz.
Yes, I mean, as always, the time was too short to have a full glimpse of this really interesting points of view. And as you told, thank you once again for this really international panel, because we had guests from Czech Republic, we have got guests from Netherlands and from across the Atlantic Ocean. So it was a really amazing experience.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now short break, 10 minutes, okay? And we will see the session, second session, yes? Thank you very much.
Thank you.